My name is Callie Morin, and I'm 34 years old, the kind of woman people overlook because I smell like old paper and dust. Most mornings begin the same way. The bell over the door jingles softly as I unlock my little shop, the paper lantern. The name still makes me smile. It was my grandmother's idea. She used to say books were lanterns too, carrying light through time. But to most people in town, my shop is just another relic clinging to survival. I dust off the front display, line up the window copies, and wait for the faint hope of customers. The air always smells faintly of cedar, glue, and aged paper, a smell I've grown to love more than perfume. It's a quiet life, and sometimes a lonely one, but every book on those shelves holds a memory of her. My grandmother taught me to treat every volume like a person, never just an object. Books are souls that don't die, she'd say. Across the street stands my competition, a modern cafe bookstore called Chapter and Chill. They've got neon lights, bean bags, and endless lattes. People flock there for selfies and cappuccinos, not for stories. The owners, Tessa and her brother Eric, make sure I know it too. Every time I pass by, they smirk and whisper jokes about the library ghost. They call my shop the paper coffin. I pretend not to hear, but their words stick like dust on a windowsill. Business has been slow since they opened. Some days, I don't make enough to cover electricity, but I can't bring myself to give up. My grandmother's handwriting is still on the shop ledger. The thought of closing this place feels like erasing her completely. In the quiet moments between customers, I often wander to the back shelf where the rare books sit, spines cracked, titles fading, stories long forgotten by everyone but me. That shelf is my sanctuary. Each book has its own heartbeat if you listen closely enough. One of them, though, has always intrigued me. A heavy, leather-bound volume, with no visible title and faint gold etching along the spine. The cover's worn smooth from years of handling. My grandmother kept it wrapped in silk before she passed it to me, saying only, "Keep this one safe." I've never had it appraised. I just assumed it was another sentimental keepsake, valuable only because she touched it. It sits there quietly while others gather dust around it. I've caught customers glancing at it and then laughing, calling it junk or a fake antique. One teenager once sneered, "Looks like something from a haunted attic." I just smiled and told her it wasn't for sale. Truthfully, I've always been too afraid to find out if it's worth anything. What if it turned out to be worthless? What if my grandmother's stories were just that, stories? The day dragged on slowly, the way most days do. Around 5, I was restacking some Victorian poetry when the bell over the door chimed. The sound startled me because it had been hours since anyone last came in. A man stepped through, tall, neatly dressed in a dark wool coat despite the mild weather. He moved with the kind of ease that comes from money or confidence, maybe both. "Good afternoon," I said, smoothing my apron. "Can I help you find something specific?" His gaze swept the shop like he was mapping it. Then his eyes landed on the back shelf. I noticed the shift instantly. His calm expression sharpened, his breathing changed. He walked straight toward it. "That book," he said quietly. "The one on the third shelf. May I?" I hesitated, surprised anyone had ever noticed it that quickly. "You mean the leather one?" "Yes." His voice dropped lower. "The one with the gold etching." I nodded and handed it to him carefully. He turned it over in his hands with the reverence of someone holding something sacred. His fingers traced the spine, lingering on the faded engraving. His lips parted slightly, almost in disbelief. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. I shook my head. "Just one of my grandmother's old books. She never told me much about it." He looked up at me, eyes narrowing. "This can't be real," he murmured, half to himself. Something in his tone made my stomach flutter, not excitement, but unease. "Is it valuable?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened it, inspecting the pages, the stitching, the faint ink smell that rose like memory. "You should be careful with this," he finally said. "Where did you get it?" I hesitated. "It was my grandmother's." He studied me for a moment, then reached into his coat and handed me a business card. "If you ever consider selling," he said softly, "call me first." Before I could reply, he placed the book back on the counter almost reluctantly and turned toward the door. The bell chimed again, and he was gone. I looked down at the card. His name was Julian Voss, rare literature consultant. I stood there long after he left, staring at the leather book sitting innocently on the counter. The shop felt different now, like the air had thickened, charged with something I couldn't name. That night, as I locked up, I caught myself glancing back at the shelf again and again. My grandmother's words echoed in my head. Keep this one safe. I had never thought much about that warning until now. Julian's reaction replayed in my mind, over and over. Maybe it wasn't just a family heirloom. Maybe it was something far more. But one day, someone else walked in, someone who looked at that junk book and froze. The moment that man's eyes landed on my grandmother's shelf, I knew something had shifted in the air. That night, I barely slept. I sat at my small kitchen table, Julian Voss's business card resting beside my teacup like a silent dare. Rare literature consultant, it read, embossed in fine gold letters. Below his name was a number, and beneath that, a London address. I traced the lettering with my finger, wondering who he really was. The way he looked at that book almost reverently haunted me. Morning came too quickly. I unlocked the shop with shaky hands, telling myself it was just another day. But the moment I walked past the back shelf, my eyes went straight to that book. I couldn't stop thinking about it. What had Julian meant by, "You should be careful with this"? Around mid-morning, as if summoned by my curiosity, the bell over the door chimed again. My stomach flipped when I saw him standing there. Same dark coat, same composed expression, but this time, his smile was faintly apologetic. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. I hesitated. "You found me yesterday. What brings you back so soon?" He gave a small laugh. I couldn't stop thinking about that book. I felt a strange mix of flattery and fear. "I told you it was my grandmother's." "Yes," he said softly, stepping closer to the counter. "But do you have any idea what it might be?" "I told you." "No," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm guessing you do." He looked around the shop before leaning in slightly, lowering his voice. "May I hold it again?" Something about his tone made me uneasy, but I nodded. He handled it delicately, turning the pages as though they were made of glass. I noticed his hands trembling. "This binding, these stitches, they're not modern," he murmured. "And this emblem," he pointed to a faint rose engraving on the inner cover, was the mark of a small printing house in Bath that closed in 1814. "I've only seen one other book like this." I frowned. "So it's rare?" He met my eyes. "If it's what I think it is, extraordinarily." The word hung in the air between us. I didn't know whether to be excited or frightened. He closed the book gently. "Would you ever consider selling it?" "I don't think so," I said quickly. "It belonged to my grandmother. It's sentimental." Julian studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Of course, I respect that." He slid a small envelope across the counter. "That's my card again, with an updated number. If you change your mind, call me. I'd like to make sure it goes to the right hands." When he left, the bell jingled softly. But the silence that followed was heavier than before. I watched through the front window as he crossed the street, stopping briefly to speak to someone on his phone. He looked tense. The rest of the day passed in a fog. I must have rearranged the same shelf 3 times without realizing it. Every time I glanced at the book, I felt a strange pull as though it wanted to tell me something. When the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the shop in golden shadows, I locked the doors and turned off the lights. But I didn't go home right away. Instead, I sat behind the counter and opened the book for the first time in years. The pages were fragile but surprisingly well preserved. Faded ink danced across the paper in beautiful, looping handwriting. The title page read, "Whispers of the Rose." The author's name was barely legible, something like A. M. Wren. The date, 1812. The dedication, "To those who listen to silence." A shiver ran down my spine. I read the first few pages, flowery, romantic prose about love, betrayal, and hidden truths. But what caught my attention wasn't the story. It was the faint handwriting in the margins, tiny notes written in another hand entirely. The ink was darker, fresher, like someone had annotated it long after its printing. I could barely make out the words, but one phrase stood clear. The truth is buried deeper. I felt the urge to research immediately. I closed up, brought the book home, and sat with my laptop at the kitchen table. I typed Whispers of the Rose First Edition 1812 into a search bar. For a long moment, nothing but irrelevant links appeared. Then, near the bottom of the page, I found a mention on a rare book forum, an old thread from collectors discussing a lost edition by A.M. Wren, believed destroyed in a fire in 1830. Only 2 surviving copies were rumored to exist, both in private collections. I scrolled through the comments, my pulse quickening. One user claimed a single edition was still unaccounted for, the bath printing, identifiable by a gold-etched rose on the inside cover. My hands trembled. The book on my table had that exact mark. I sat back, heart racing. Could it really be that rare? That valuable? And if so, how did my grandmother come to own it? I stared at her photograph on my shelf, her kind, knowing eyes, her mischievous smile. "What did you know that I didn't?" I whispered. The night stretched long and restless. I couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was hidden within those pages, but I told myself I'd wait until morning to look deeper. I locked the book safely in my shop's backroom safe before heading home, reassured it would be secure. Still, even as I tried to sleep, I could hear my grandmother's voice echoing in my mind. "Keep this one safe, Callie." I didn't understand why it suddenly sounded like a warning. That night, I decided to finally find out what my grandmother had really left me. I had handled hundreds of old books, but this one suddenly felt alive beneath my fingertips. The next morning, I arrived at the Paper Lantern before sunrise. The street outside was still quiet, the shop windows across the road dark. My breath fogged the glass as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. For a moment, the familiar scent of paper and wood polish calmed me, but beneath it, I felt something else, a tension that hummed in the air, as though the shop itself knew I was about to uncover something. I went straight to the backroom safe and retrieved the book. Its cover seemed darker than I remembered, almost pulsing under the thin morning light. I carried it to the counter, opened my laptop, and began digging deeper online. This time, I widened my search, scrolling through auction listings, rare book archives, and literary databases. The results came slowly, but when they did, my stomach flipped. Whispers of the Rose appeared in an old British library catalogue classified as missing since 1923. I found mentions in collectors' forums describing it as a legendary lost print. Some even called it the Holy Grail of romantic literature. There were speculations about its mysterious author, A.M. Wren, who supposedly vanished after the book's publication. Some believed she had been a noblewoman writing under a pseudonym. Others thought she was a governess who had discovered something dangerous about her employers. The theories were endless, but one detail stood out in every post: the last confirmed copy was sold for a staggering $340,000 in a private auction nearly a decade ago. My hands trembled as I scrolled. Could it be possible? Could my grandmother's book, this dusty relic, be worth that much? Or even more? I turned to the inner pages again. The handwriting in the margins called to me. It wasn't my grandmother's, I was sure of that. The strokes were older, written with a quill or dip pen. I read more closely, deciphering faded words. "He hides in plain sight," one note read. Another said, "Not all roses are meant to bloom." The sentences didn't make much sense out of context, but they added an eerie beauty to the story. I snapped a few photos of the pages with my phone and sent them to Victor, my friend from college who now worked as an appraiser for antique collections. He had a sharp eye for details and an even sharper tongue. A few minutes later, he called me. "Callie, are you joking?" he asked. "I wish I were," I said, my voice shaky. "Could this actually be real?" He paused, then said, "If what I'm seeing is genuine, that's one of the rarest editions ever printed, but I'll need clearer images. Can you scan it?" "I don't have a scanner here," I said. "But I could bring it to you." "Don't." he said quickly. If that book's real, don't take it anywhere public. Just keep it secure until I can come by. The seriousness in his tone made my chest tighten. I agreed and hung up, staring down at the book like it might vanish if I looked away. The rest of the morning crawled by. A few customers drifted in, buying paperbacks or greeting cards, but I could barely focus. My mind kept circling back to the book's value, its story, its mystery, and what my grandmother must have known. Around lunch, I decided to take a break. I made tea, sat in the back room, and stared at the safe. It was silly, but I felt protective, like a mother hen guarding her chick. The shop's silence pressed around me, the kind that hums before a storm. Out of habit, I checked my security system, a small, outdated setup my uncle had installed years ago. Everything seemed fine. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that I wasn't alone. I told myself it was nerves, that I'd been reading too many Gothic novels. When I returned home that evening, I left the book locked safely away again. My apartment felt colder than usual, the shadows stretching longer than they should. I tried reading to distract myself but found I couldn't focus. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Julian's face, his expression when he first saw the book, the tremor in his voice. Around midnight, I finally drifted off on the couch, the television murmuring faintly in the background. My dreams were strange, a garden of roses that whispered my name, their petals bleeding ink. My grandmother stood among them, holding the leather-bound book and smiling at me, saying, "You're ready now." I woke with a start, the room dark except for the flickering blue light of the TV. My heart hammered. I tried to shake the feeling, telling myself it was just a dream. The next morning, I returned to the shop early again. Everything looked normal. The shelves, the counters, the faint glint of morning sunlight through the dusty window. I unlocked the back room, ready to show Victor the book when he arrived later that day. But when I opened the safe, my blood ran cold. It was empty. At first, I thought I was mistaken. I tore through every shelf, every drawer, even the counter. My pulse roared in my ears. I searched the shop from front to back, calling out like a fool. "This isn't funny." The book was gone. I stood there in the center of my shop, surrounded by the smell of old paper and panic, realizing something unthinkable had happened. My grandmother's legacy, the one thing that tied me to her, had vanished. There was no sign of forced entry. The door had been locked, the windows unbroken. My hands shook as I checked the safe again, as if maybe I'd missed it somehow. But it was empty. A hollow feeling crept into my chest, sharp and deep. Whoever had taken it knew exactly what they were doing. But by the next morning, the book wasn't there anymore. My heart stopped cold when I opened the safe and saw the empty space where the book had been. For a moment, I couldn't move. My brain refused to process what my eyes saw, or rather, what they didn't. The safe stood wide open, its velvet lining empty, a thin outline of dust marking where the book used to rest. I ran my trembling hands through my hair, whispering to myself, "No, no, no, this isn't happening." I dropped to my knees and checked the floor around the safe, hoping it had somehow fallen. Nothing. The faint smell of iron and paper filled the air, but there was no trace of the book. My stomach twisted painfully. As reality settled in, it was gone. My first thought was burglary, but when I checked the shop's front door, the lock was intact. The windows were secure. The register was untouched, and every other item remained perfectly in place. Whoever took the book wasn't after money. They knew exactly what they wanted. The only people who had ever been near that safe were me, my part-time assistant Mia, and my grandmother before she passed. Mia was a sweet girl, 22, quiet and shy, but lately she'd been distracted, missing shifts, coming in late. When she finally arrived that morning, carrying her coffee, I could barely contain myself. "Mia," I said sharply, "when was the last time you went near the safe?" She blinked at me, confused. Last week? Why?" "The book, it's gone." Her coffee sloshed as she set the cup down too quickly. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" "I mean someone took it." Her face paled. "Callie, I didn't even touch it." Her voice sounded sincere, but fear made me suspicious of everyone. I gestured toward the back room. You were closing the shop 2 nights ago, right? She nodded nervously. Yeah, but I didn't see anything weird. I locked everything like normal. I studied her expression, wide eyes, shaking hands. Either she was a good liar, or she was genuinely terrified. You didn't see anyone around? Maybe that man who came in last week? Julian? She asked. He came by again yesterday while you were out for lunch. My stomach dropped. Yeah, he said he wanted to ask you something about that same book. I told him you weren't in, and he said he'd come back later. I felt cold all over. Julian had been here again. After insisting I call him, after acting so intrigued, he'd shown up uninvited. I marched to the small camera monitor on the counter and rewound the footage. The black and white feed flickered faintly, showing the front door, counter, and partial view of the back room. The footage from yesterday played normally me locking up, Mia sweeping floors, the empty shop at closing time. But then, around midnight, I saw it. A faint shadow moved across the backroom floor. Someone had slipped, in quick, silent, barely visible. The outline was tall, broad-shouldered. I couldn't make out the face. But the build, it could have been him. I felt bile rise in my throat. Julian Voss. I sat down hard on the stool, my hands shaking. He took it, I whispered. He took my grandmother's book. Mia hovered nearby. Should we call the police? I hesitated. What would I tell them? That a stranger might have stolen an antique book I couldn't even prove was valuable? The footage was too grainy to identify anyone. The police would probably write me off as paranoid. I'll handle it, I said finally. You can go home for the day. Once she left, I stared at the business card Julian had given me. His name gleamed up at me like a dare. I dialed the number. It rang 3 times before a recorded voice answered. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. I slammed the phone down. Panic and anger boiling together. He'd vanished. Just like that. My mind spun with possibilities. Maybe he was working with someone. Maybe Tessa and her brother, with their smug grins and endless mockery, had something to do with it. They'd always envied my antique collection. Maybe Julian wasn't a collector at all. Maybe he was a thief scouting for them. Driven by a mix of rage and fear, I grabbed my coat and locked up. The cafe across the street was bustling, laughter spilling from its open windows. Inside, I saw Tessa behind the counter, her perfect hair shining under the lights. And there at the far end of the bar stood Julian. He was talking to her, laughing. The sight froze me in place. My pulse pounded in my ears. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I didn't need to. The way she leaned in, smiling up at him, told me enough. They knew each other. Maybe they always had. Tessa noticed me through the glass and smirked. She whispered something to Julian, who turned, meeting my eyes for a brief, chilling second. Then he looked away, pretending I wasn't there. I stepped back from the window, my breath shallow. My grandmother's book, the one she trusted me to protect, was gone. And the man who had warned me to keep it safe was now sharing coffee with my biggest rival. I felt humiliation and fury burning in my chest. They'd mocked me for years, called my shop outdated, my life small. And now, they'd taken something irreplaceable. No, I wasn't going to let them get away with it. That's when I saw Julian standing inside the new cafe, talking to its owner. Seeing the man who'd obsessed over my grandmother's book laughing with my rivals felt like betrayal on top of fear. I stood outside the cafe window, the world narrowing to that single image, Julian and Tessa, their heads bent close, smiling like old friends sharing a secret. My heart hammered in my chest. The sight didn't just sting, it burned. I had trusted him, however briefly, with a piece of my grandmother's memory. And now he was sitting comfortably with the very people who had spent years mocking me in my shop. I took a step back, gripping my coat tighter around me as anger replaced shock. I pushed open the cafe door. The bell above it rang a too cheerful sound for the fury boiling inside me. The smell of espresso and sugar filled the air, but I barely noticed. Every head turned as I crossed the floor toward them. Tessa's eyes sparkled with amusement as she saw me. Well, If it isn't Callie from the paper lantern, she said loudly, her tone dripping with false sweetness. What brings you to the modern world? Run out of cobwebs to dust. A few customers chuckled under their breath. I ignored them, focusing on Julian. He looked up, startled at first, then forced a polite smile. Callie, he said, as if nothing were wrong. I stopped in front of their table. You told me to keep that book safe, I said. Now it's missing, and here you are having coffee with her. Tessa raised and bought it, eyebrow. Missing? What are you talking about? I ignored her. Where is it, Julian? My voice was steady, but inside, I was shaking. You were in my shop again yesterday. Mia saw you. Julian frowned slightly. I did stop by. Yes, you weren't there. So I left. Left? I repeated bitterly. That's convenient, especially since the book disappeared that same night. A hush settled over the cafe. Even the barista froze mid-pour. Julian set down his cup slowly. Callie, he said carefully. I think you're upset, and understandably so. But I swear I had nothing to do with your missing book. Tessa snorted. Oh, come on. You think he stole one of your antiques? Please. Maybe you misplaced it. You've got enough dust in that shop to hide an elephant. Laughter rippled through the room. My cheeks flushed hot, but I stood my ground. You'd love that, wouldn't you? I shot back. To see my shop fail. To see me humiliated. Tessa tilted her head, eyes glittering. You're doing a fine job of that yourself. I turned to Julian, ignoring her. Why were you with her? How do you know each other? He hesitated, then said, Tessa and I have done business before. She deals in vintage prints and local consignments. That's all. My stomach dropped. So you do work together. He sighed. Not like that. Look, you're angry, but you're jumping to conclusions. Let me help you find your book. I can reach out to contacts, check if anything's surfaced for sale. If it's rare, it'll stand out quickly. His words sounded reasonable, even kind, but his calmness only infuriated me more. He was too smooth, too controlled. Don't bother, I said coldly. I'll handle it myself. Tessa leaned back in her chair, smirking. You really think someone would go through all that trouble for an old book that smells like mildew? I stared at her. Maybe someone would if it's worth more than you could ever imagine. Her smile faltered slightly, just for a moment, but enough for me to see it, the flicker of recognition. She knew something. I turned and walked out before either of them could say another word. The doorbell jingled behind me like a cruel echo. Outside, the autumn air felt sharp and electric. I leaned against the brick wall of my shop across the street, my breath coming fast. Every instinct in me screamed that Tessa and Julian were involved. But I had no proof. Just a gut feeling and a blurry shadow on a camera. That evening, I called Victor again. He picked up on the second ring. Tell me you found something, I said, pacing my living room. He sighed. Not yet. I checked a few private auction boards, but nothing's been listed that matches your description. Still, I did some digging into that Julian Voss guy. I stopped pacing. And? He's legit mostly, Victor said. He's been part of several estate sales and literary auctions across Europe. But here's the thing, 2 of those events ended in stolen inventory. My pulse spiked. You think he's behind them? I don't know yet. But his name popping up twice isn't coincidence. I pressed a hand to my forehead. Victor. The book's gone. Someone broke into the shop and took it. No forced entry, no signs of struggle. Just gone. He was quiet for a moment. Then his voice lowered. Callie, you need to be careful. If that book's what I think it is, it's worth more than people kill for. His words hit me like ice water. Kill? I repeated. It's rumored to have historical significance, something about marginal notes revealing a hidden affair between a noble family and an author. If it's the missing edition, collectors would go insane for it. Some wouldn't stop at theft. I sank onto the couch, my heart pounding. What should I do? Let me come by tomorrow, Victor said. We'll make a report, get the local police involved quietly. But for now, keep your doors locked. Don't talk to anyone you don't trust. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. My hands were shaking too hard to hold the phone properly. After we hung up, I looked out the window at the dark street below. The town felt different now, quieter, heavier. I couldn't shake the image of Tessa's smirk or the way Julian had looked at me with that unreadable calm. I didn't know who to trust anymore. But one thing was certain. I wasn't letting this go. Not when my grandmother's legacy and maybe something much bigger was on the line. Victor's voice crackled through the phone. Callie, do you know what that book really is? Victor's tone wasn't excitement, it was fear. When I heard his voice shake on the other end of the line, I knew this wasn't just about an old book anymore. What do you mean? I asked, pressing the phone tighter to my ear. What's wrong with it? There was a pause, the faint rustle of papers on his end. That edition, Whispers of the Rose, isn't just rare. It's practically mythological in collector circles. Only 3 confirmed copies exist in the world. Yours would have been the 4th. But here's where it gets complicated. I swallowed hard. Go on. The author, A.M. Wren, wasn't who people thought she was. There's evidence she was actually Lady Adeline Whitmore, a noblewoman who vanished under scandalous circumstances in the early 1800s. Her family covered it up, destroyed her letters, banned her name from literary history. But before she disappeared, she supposedly printed one final edition of her book, your edition, with handwritten notes that exposed something her family wanted buried. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knees weak. What kind of something? Rumors, he said quietly. An affair with a member of the royal household, illegitimate. Children, fraud. No one knows for sure. But if those marginal notes in your copy really contain her confessions, it's a piece of explosive history. That's why collectors and criminals would go after it. My mind reeled. I thought of Julian's careful eyes scanning the margins, of his trembling hands as he turned the pages. So he knew, I murmured. Julian knew exactly what it was. Victor sighed. That's what it sounds like. I also checked his background again. Turns out he's connected to several private auctions in Paris and Berlin. 2 of them ended with missing artifacts, and both investigations were dropped quietly. He's good, Callie. Too good. I pressed a hand to my forehead, the room spinning. So what do I do now? He's gone, the book's gone, and I have no proof. Then you start building proof, Victor said. Gather everything you can, emails, messages, photos, anything connecting Julian or that cafe owner to the book. Don't confront them again, not yet. Let me handle the legal side. I nodded slowly, my heart pounding. Okay. After hanging up, I sat in silence for a long time, listening to the faint hum of the shop's heater. The weight of Victor's words pressed down on me. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore, it was about danger, and I was already in the middle of it. That afternoon, I started documenting everything. I took pictures of the safe screenshots of Julian's now disconnected number, even the security footage with the shadowy figure. I wrote down every detail I could remember: the smell of his cologne, the look in Tessa's eyes, the exact words he'd said. My hands shook as I wrote, but something in me hardened. If they wanted to take what was mine, they'd regret it. As I went through my desk drawers, I found something that made my blood run cold: a torn scrap of paper, tucked behind the register. It was part of Julian's business card, but along the torn edge was a Samli wan Hizret, handwritten address that hadn't been there before. The ink was faint but legible. Warehouse 42, Southridge Industrial Park. I stared at it, my pulse racing. Southridge was on the edge of town, mostly abandoned storage facilities and shipping lots. It wasn't a place people casually visited. Why would he have written that down, and why would it be hidden in my shop? For a brief moment, I thought about calling Victor again. But something stronger than fear took over, a fierce curiosity that felt almost like instinct. I needed answers, not theories. As evening fell, I slipped the paper into my pocket, locked up the shop, and stood outside under the flickering streetlight. The wind carried the faint scent of rain. I told myself I'd just drive by, maybe see if the warehouse even existed. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't stop there. The drive to Southridge was silent except for the hum of my old sedan. The streets grew darker the farther I went, lined with rusted fences and overgrown weeds. The warehouse district looked like something time had forgotten, hulking gray buildings and cracked pavement under orange street lamps. When I finally saw the number 42 painted faintly on a metal door, my stomach twisted. I parked across the street, engine idling, and stared. The building looked deserted, but faint light glowed from one of the windows. Someone was inside. For 10 minutes, I sat frozen, trying to talk myself out of going closer. But then I saw movement, 2 figures crossing the light. One of them was tall, wearing a coat that looked exactly like Julian's. That was all it took. I turned off the engine, stepped out, and pulled my jacket tighter. The air smelled of oil and rust. My footsteps echoed as I crept closer to the warehouse, heart hammering. A heavy lock hung from the front door, but the side entrance was slightly ajar. I hesitated, then slipped through the narrow gap. The inside smelled of dust and old paper, familiar yet wrong. Stacks of crates filled the space, marked with shipping codes and faded stamps. I moved quietly between them, scanning for any sign of the book. A faint glow spilled from the far corner, where I could hear voices, Julian's, unmistakable, and another man's, deeper, rougher. I crouched behind a stack of boxes and listened. "Voss, you said she didn't know," the other man said. "She didn't," Julian replied. "Not until I saw it. I just didn't expect her to be that clever." My chest tightened. "Good," the man said. "We move it tomorrow. The buyer's already wired the deposit." Buyer, deposit. The words hit like a physical blow. They were planning to sell it to erase my grandmother's legacy for profit. I fumbled for my phone and hit record, zooming in on their silhouettes through a crack between crates. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped it. I had my proof now, but I had no idea what I'd stepped into. And on that torn edge was a handwritten address I didn't recognize. I don't know what came over me, but I decided to go to that address alone. I told myself it was curiosity, maybe even courage. But deep down, it was desperation. I needed to see what Julian and his accomplices were hiding. I needed to prove, to myself and to everyone else, that I wasn't crazy, that my grandmother's legacy wasn't slipping away without a fight. The night air was colder than I expected. The sky hung heavy with clouds, and the dim streetlights in Southridge flickered like dying candles. My car's headlights cut through the mist, illuminating the massive warehouse ahead of me. The number 42 was spray-painted crookedly across the front door, the paint peeling like old skin. I parked 2 blocks away, my breath visible in the air as I walked closer. The only sound was the crunch of gravel beneath my boots. I clutched my phone tight, recording just in case. Every instinct told me this was reckless, that I should have called Victor or the police, but I couldn't risk losing the chance to see that book again. The main door was locked, but along the side, a smaller entrance hung slightly ajar. I slipped in, my heart thudding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The smell hit me first: dust, old paper, and metal. The faint hum of an industrial heater echoed from somewhere deeper inside. The interior was lined with tall metal racks filled with wooden crates. I moved between them slowly, every sound amplified in the cavernous space. Then I saw a small lamp flickering near the back, beside a workbench stacked with books, ledgers, and brown packages. My pulse quickened when I saw the logo stamped on one crate. The paper lantern? My shop's label. I swallowed hard and crept closer. My hands shook as I brushed away the packing straw and pried the lid open. Inside were books, my books' titles I hadn't seen in days, maybe weeks. Some still had my handwritten price tags on them. And there, lying on top like a crown jewel, was my grandmother's leather-bound treasure. The sight made my throat tighten. I reached for it, fingertips brushing the familiar cover when a sound froze me, a voice. "Don't move." I turned slowly. Julian stood in the doorway, holding a flashlight that cut through the dark. Behind him was another man, broad-shouldered, his face half hidden by a hood. My chest seized. I recognized him from the cafe, the man Tessa had called her brother, Eric. Julian's expression wasn't angry, just resigned. "You shouldn't be here, Callie," he said. I backed away from the crate. You stole from me. He sighed. It's not that simple. Eric's voice was sharp and impatient. She's already seen too much. We have to move everything tonight. Julian glanced at him. Let me talk to her. Eric scoffed. You had your chance. They argued in hushed tones, and in that brief moment, I spotted my opportunity. My phone was still in my hand, recording. I slowly tapped the screen, zooming in on their faces. If I could just get clear footage, Victor would have all the proof he needed. I edged backward, toward a stack of crates that offered cover. My palms were slick with sweat, my breath shallow. Callie, Julian said, stepping toward me. You don't understand what you're holding on to. That book, if the wrong people get it, it won't just disappear. People will. Then why take it? I shot back. You said it needed to be in the right hands. Was that before or after you decided to sell it? For a moment, something human flickered in his eyes, guilt. You think I wanted this? They found me first. I didn't have a choice. Eric cut in, voice low and venomous. Enough talking, grab the box. Julian hesitated. She's not part of this, Eric snarled. She is now. That's when I realized I was in real danger. The kind of danger that didn't end with an apology. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I needed to get out fast. I took a single step back, and my shoe hit a loose piece of metal with a sharp clang. Both men turned. Callie! Julian shouted, reaching for me, but I bolted toward the side door. My phone slipped from my hand and hit the floor, the recording still running. I sprinted through the narrow aisles, breath ragged, vision blurring from panic. Behind me, I heard footsteps heavy, closing in fast. The cold night air hit me like a slap when I burst outside. I didn't stop. I ran toward the parking lot, lungs burning, until I ducked behind an abandoned trailer. I crouched low, gasping, listening to their voices echo faintly in the distance. Find her, Eric barked. She's not getting out of here with that book. My mind raced. The book, I still had it. Somehow, in my panic, I hadn't let go. Its worn cover pressed against my chest like a heartbeat. I clutched it tighter, shaking uncontrollably. The warehouse lights flickered as shadows moved past the pawnee windows. I waited until I was sure they'd gone back inside before creeping toward the edge of the lot. My car was just ahead, dimly visible under the weak streetlight. I was almost there when my phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me so badly I nearly dropped the book. I pulled it out, breath trembling. The screen flashed a name I didn't expect to see. Julian Voss. My blood ran cold. How did he still have my number? Why was he calling me now? For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, heart hammering, torn between fear and curiosity. Then, without thinking, I hit decline. But as I turned to leave, my phone buzzed, Julian's name flashing on the screen. I froze, staring at his name lighting up my trembling hand. Julian Voss. The man who had charmed me with polite smiles and quiet knowledge, the man who had stolen from me and lied, was calling me in the middle of the night while I hid behind an abandoned trailer with my grandmother's book clutched to my chest. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The phone vibrated again, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. Then, silence. No voicemail. Just the heavy hum of the wind moving through the empty lot. I shoved the phone back into my pocket and ran the rest of the way to my car. My hands shook as I jammed the key into the ignition. The headlights flicked on, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw movement in my rearview mirror. A dark figure standing near the warehouse door. Watching me. My stomach turned. I hit the gas and tore out of there, gravel spitting beneath the tires. By the time I reached the edge of town, my heart still hadn't slowed. I locked my apartment door twice, triple-checked the windows, then sank to the floor. I pressed the book against my knees, whispering to myself, "You're safe now. You're safe." But even saying it out loud didn't make it true. I didn't feel safe. Not anymore. I needed help. I pulled out my phone and texted Victor, "Callie, I found them. Warehouse 42. Julian and Tessa's brother were there. They have crates from my shop. I got the book back. I think they saw me. It took him less than a minute to reply. Victor, get out of your apartment. Now. They know who you are. If they think you took the book, they'll come for you. I'm calling the police. The message made my pulse spike again. I looked around the small apartment, the mismatched furniture, the cozy reading nook by the window, the shelves full of books I'd loved since childhood. The idea of abandoning it all felt impossible. But the fear in Victor's words left no room for hesitation. I stuffed the book into a canvas bag, grabbed my car keys, and was halfway to the door when a soft ding from my laptop made me stop. The screen glowed in the darkness. I hadn't turned it on. A single message blinked across the screen in a chat window I didn't recognize. You shouldn't have gone there. My breath caught. Another message appeared almost instantly. We know what you took. Put it back, and we'll forget this happened. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped the bag. Someone had hacked into my computer. Someone was watching me. I slammed the laptop shut, grabbed my bag, and bolted for the door. I didn't stop running until I was in the car, locking the doors and starting the engine. My mind spun wildly. Julian? Eric? Tessa? Who else could be involved? I drove without direction for almost an hour, circling the outskirts of town until the panic dulled enough to think straight. I finally parked at a small roadside motel and rented a room under a fake name. The clerk didn't even look up from his crossword as I signed Lila Monroe. The lie came too easily. Inside the tiny room, I locked the door and shoved a chair under the knob. The smell of stale carpet and cigarette smoke filled the air. I set the bag with the book on the bed and stared at it for a long time. It looked so ordinary sitting there, dusty leather, cracked spine, yet it had thrown my entire world into chaos. I pulled it out carefully, flipping through the pages, searching for any clue why it was worth so much. Why people were willing to threaten and steal for it. The handwriting in the margins glowed faintly under the weak lamp, as if the ink itself refused to fade. The more I read, the more I realized it wasn't just commentary. It was confession. In one note, Lady Adeline had written, "I did what I must, though it cost me my name. He promised protection, but truth is heavier than love." Another read, "The rose will bloom only once, and then it will bleed." The cryptic lines chilled me. Were these metaphors or veiled admissions of something terrible? I didn't know. But one thing was clear. This book carried a secret powerful enough to destroy reputations. Maybe even centuries later. My phone buzzed again, startling me. It was Victor. "Where are you?" he asked urgently. "Some motel off Route 9. I didn't want to say the name in case." "Good," he interrupted. "Stay hidden." The police checked the warehouse. It's empty. Whoever was there cleared out. What? They were just there hours ago. I know. But they're gone now. And Callie, your shop's been broken into. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. What? They didn't take anything major, just rummaged through your office, probably looking for the book. I clutched the leather volume tighter. Victor, they know where I live. They hacked my computer. They're watching me. "I'm sending someone to meet you," he said. "Don't go anywhere, and don't trust anyone. I'll be there in the morning." We hung up, and I sat in silence, staring at the door as if expecting someone to burst through it. Every sound, the creak of pipes, the hum of the fridge made me flinch. My nerves were stretched so thin I could almost hear my heartbeat echoing. I placed the book on the nightstand, then curled up on the bed, clutching a pillow to my chest. The darkness pressed against the windows like a living thing. I told myself that if I could just make it to morning, everything would be okay. But as I drifted between exhaustion and terror, a soft scraping noise made my eyes snap open. Someone was outside the door. The knob rattled gently. Once, then again. The chair under it shifted slightly. My blood froze. I didn't dare move or breathe. After a long, endless moment, the sound stopped. Silence. Then, faint footsteps retreating down the hall. I lay there, shaking, until the first light of dawn crept through the blinds. That's when I realized they were watching me. For the first time, my beloved shop felt like a trap instead of a refuge. I returned to the paper lantern at sunrise, even though Victor had begged me to stay hidden. The morning air was sharp, the streets empty except for a delivery truck rumbling past. I parked across the road, staring at my shop from the safety of the car. The front window was cracked, splintered right through the middle of my hand-painted logo. My chest tightened. Whoever broke in hadn't just come for the book, they wanted to send a message. I stepped inside cautiously. The smell hit me first: paper, coffee, and something acrid, like burnt dust. Books lay scattered across the floor. My desk drawers had been pulled out, my filing cabinet overturned. My grandmother's ledger, usually kept in a locked drawer, sat open on the counter with a knife stabbed clean through its spine. A warning. My knees nearly buckled. I ran my hands over the scarred pages and whispered, "You didn't deserve this." But grief quickly turned to anger. Whoever they were, they had crossed a line. This wasn't just theft anymore. This was personal. I spent the next hour cleaning up, methodically restoring order to the chaos. It was something to focus on, something to keep the fear at bay. As I swept up the glass near the front, I caught sight of the small camera. Victor had helped me install months ago my humble security system. It was still blinking red. I prayed it had captured something. When Victor arrived, he looked exhausted but determined. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, setting down his laptop. "They could have been waiting." "I couldn't just sit in a motel while they tore this place apart," I said, pulling the camera feed onto the monitor. "Look." He fast-forwarded through hours of footage. Nothing. Then movement around 314 a.m. A shadow slipped through the window, tall, thin, moving with precision. They wore gloves and a hood, their face hidden, but something about the way they moved, the confidence, made my stomach twist. Victor frowned. "They knew where the cameras were." "They didn't take the cash register," I said. "Didn't take anything but my piece." He gave me a sympathetic look. "They want you rattled." "Well, it's working," I muttered. He started typing rapidly on his laptop. "I ran background checks on everyone you mentioned: Julian, Tessa, Eric. You were right about the cafe. It's not really a business. It's a front. The tax records are fake, and most of their suppliers don't exist." My jaw tightened. "So what is it?" "A laundering operation," Victor said grimly. "Artifacts, rare manuscripts, heirlooms, things they can flip at underground auctions. Julian acts as the broker, Tessa handles the social connections, and Eric handles muscle." I stared at the floor, the reality sinking in. "They targeted me because of my collection." He nodded. "They probably figured you wouldn't know what you had." A bitter laugh escaped me. "They were right until now." Victor looked at me seriously. "You need to hand the book over to the police." "No." The word came out sharper than I intended. "If I do that, it disappears into evidence. It'll be years before anyone sees it again, if ever. That book belongs to my family. Callie, these people are dangerous. They won't stop until they get it. Then they'll have to come through me." He rubbed his forehead. "You're playing a dangerous game." I met his eyes. "It's already in play." Victor sighed and leaned back. "Fine. If you're keeping it, then we make this place a fortress. Cameras, locks, motion sensors, whatever it takes. You stay here, and you don't open the door for anyone." We spent the rest of the day installing equipment. He wired cameras to every corner of the shop, linked them to his phone, and replaced the back door lock with a reinforced bolt. For the first time in days, I felt a small spark of control. When night fell, Victor insisted on staying nearby. He parked his car just down the street, promising to keep watch. "Call if anything happens," he said. "Thanks," I whispered. "For believing me." He smiled faintly. "You've got more grit than anyone I know, Callie. Just don't let it get you killed." After he left, the shop felt unnervingly quiet. The hum of the heater was the only sound. I turned off most of the lights, leaving only the warm glow of a desk lamp near the window. My grandmother's book sat beside it, wrapped in a silk scarf, looking deceptively innocent. I tried reading to distract myself, but every creak of the floorboards made me jump. Around midnight, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat behind the counter, scrolling through the live camera feeds on my phone. Everything was still. For once, silence didn't feel peaceful, it felt like waiting. By 2 a.m., Exhaustion began to pull at my eyelids. I laid my head on my arms, telling myself I'd just rest for a moment. But then a faint sound. Footsteps. Inside. My eyes snapped open. I froze, straining to listen. There it was again. Closer this time, a soft creak near the back room door. My phone slipped from my hand as adrenaline surged through me. I looked at the live feed. One of the cameras had gone black. "Victor," I whispered, fumbling for my phone. "Someone's here." Before I could hit call, I heard the unmistakable sound of a box being kicked over. I turned toward the shadows just as a figure stepped into the faint light. Julian. He looked different this time, haunted, desperate. His clothes were rumpled, his face drawn. He raised his hands slowly, like a man surrendering. "Callie," he said softly. "Please. We need to talk." My heart pounded. "I didn't come to steal," he said. "I came to warn you." "Warn me?" I laughed bitterly. "You stole from me, lied to me. And now you expect me to believe you're the good guy?" He shook his head. "You don't understand. You think I'm the worst of them, but Tessa and Eric." "Save it," I snapped. "You're all the same." Julian stepped forward, his eyes full of something I couldn't read, fear, maybe guilt. "Callie, they know where the book is. You have to leave now." I took a step back, clutching the counter for balance. "Why should I believe you?" Before he could answer, a crash sounded outside, the shattering of glass. Both of us turned toward the window, and this time, when I turned around, Julian was standing there. He looked different, calm, almost regretful. But his eyes burned with determination. Julian stepped fully into the light, the glow from my desk lamp catching the sharp planes of his face. He looked nothing like the smooth, confident collector who had first walked into my shop. His coat was torn, his knuckles scraped, his voice low and frayed. "Callie, please," he said. "I didn't come here to hurt you. I came because you're in danger." I backed away, keeping the counter between us. "You expect me to believe that? After everything you've done?" He ran a trembling hand through his hair. "You think I wanted to take that book? I didn't. I was forced to. Tessa and Eric, they're not business people, Callie. They're criminals. They deal in stolen works, rare art, manuscripts, anything that can disappear quietly. I've been working with them for years, but this time, it went too far." "Too far?" I spat. "You stole from me. You broke into my shop. You lied about everything." His jaw clenched. "I didn't break in to take it this time. I came to protect you. They know you still have the book. They're on their way here right now." I wanted to tell him he was lying, but something in his voice, raw and fractured, made my pulse stutter. "Why should I believe a word you say?" "Because I'm the only one who can stop them." A faint crash outside made both of us freeze. Glass shattered in the alley, followed by hurried footsteps. Julian turned toward the sound, his face hardening. "Damn it," he muttered. "They're early." He grabbed my arm. I flinched, but he didn't let go. "We have to go. Now." I pulled away. "I'm not running. This is my shop, my grandmother's shop." His eyes softened, but his voice stayed urgent. "Then at least hide. Please." Before I could answer, the front door rattled violently. The sound of a heavy object slamming against it echoed through the store. I could hear muffled voices, Tessa's sharp, cold tone rising above the others. "Callie! Open the door! I just want to talk." Julian cursed under his breath. "They'll break it down if you don't move." He scanned the room quickly, then motioned toward the back storage closet. "Go. Lock yourself in. Don't come out until I tell you." I hesitated, fear warring with stubborn pride. "What about you?" "I'll buy you time." I didn't want to trust him, but the sound of splintering wood made the choice for me. I darted into the back closet and shut the door, my heart slamming against my ribs. Through the narrow crack between the hinges, I saw Julian move toward the entrance just as it burst open. Tessa stormed in first, her blonde hair pulled back, her expression twisted with fury. Eric followed, crowbar in hand. "Where is she?" Tessa hissed. Julian stood firm. You shouldn't be here, Eric snorted. You think you can stop us, Voss? You've gone soft. Julian stepped closer, his voice low. You're making a mistake. This isn't about money anymore. Oh, but it is, Tessa snapped. You told us that book was worth a fortune, remember? Now, where is it? I don't have it, Julian said. And you'll never find it. Liar, she spat. I pressed my hand over my mouth, trembling. The tension in the room was suffocating. Eric moved fast. He lunged forward, swinging the crowbar at Julian's shoulder. The impact made a sickening crack, and Julian staggered but didn't fall. He swung back instinctively, knocking Eric off balance. The crash of toppling shelves filled the air as books rained down like paper storms. Tessa screamed something unintelligible and grabbed a metal rod from beside the counter. I couldn't just sit there. My grandmother's shop, the one she built with love and quiet magic, was being torn apart. My fear turned to rage. I shoved the closet door open and ran out, grabbing the nearest thing I could find, a fire extinguisher. Get out of my shop, I shouted. The sudden noise startled them. I yanked the pin and blasted a thick cloud of white spray across the room. Tessa shrieked and stumbled back, covering her face. Eric cursed, dropping his weapon. Julian used the distraction to shove him hard against the wall. The fog filled the air, choking and blinding. I coughed, eyes watering, and reached for the counter where the book had been hidden beneath a stack of cloth. My hand brushed the silk cover, relief flooding me for a single heartbeat until I heard Tessa's voice behind me. You think this ends with you, bookworm? She hissed. I turned just as she lunged. Julian intercepted her, grabbing her arm, twisting it behind her back. Enough, he shouted. But before he could restrain her, Eric swung the crowbar again, this time hitting Julian across the ribs. He crumpled, gasping, and Tessa broke free, her eyes wild. I clutched the book to my chest and bolted for the back door. Behind me, chaos exploded, shouts, footsteps, crashing glass. I stumbled into the alley, sucking in cold air, and ran without looking back. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Someone must have called the police. I turned the corner just as two cruisers screeched onto the street. Blue and red lights washed over the front of my shop. Officers jumped out, weapons drawn. Hands up! One shouted. I froze, clutching the book, the fire extinguisher still dangling from my other hand. My lungs burned, my heart pounded. But for the first time, I felt something close to hope. I turned back toward the shattered doorway. Julian was slumped against the counter, blood streaking his sleeve but alive. Tessa and Eric were being pinned to the floor by officers. The chaos slowly faded into the buzz of police radios and murmured voices. I exhaled shakily, adrenaline leaving me weak. Julian lifted his head, his eyes finding mine through the haze. It was never about money, Callie, he whispered. Not for me. Before I could think, glass shattered, and Tessa's voice echoed through the dark. You think you can steal from me, bookworm? She hissed, stepping through the broken window. Her voice slithered through the chaos like venom, dripping with rage and mockery. Tessa's eyes burned wild under the flickering fluorescent light, her hair disheveled, her once perfect composure shattered. Behind her, Eric shoved past the fallen shelves, crowbar in hand, breathing hard. The sirens outside grew louder, closer, but they didn't seem to care. They were beyond reason now, consumed by greed and fury. Julian staggered to his feet, clutching his side where Eric's last blow had landed. His voice was hoarse but steady. Tessa, stop this. It's over. The police are right outside. She laughed, a cold, brittle sound. You think I care? You brought them here, didn't you? You pathetic coward. I'm trying to save you, Julian said, stepping between her and me. You don't have to go down for this. She sneered. Oh, don't act noble now. You were in it just as deep as we were. You wanted the money too. Julian shook his head. Not anymore. That was all it took to send her over the edge. She lunged forward, slashing the air with the metal rod she'd grabbed earlier. Julian dodged, wincing from the pain, and I instinctively ducked behind the counter, clutching the book tight to my chest. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind, "Keep this one safe." The front window shattered completely as Eric stormed through, swinging his crowbar like a man possessed. "Where is it?" he bellowed. "Where's the damn book?" I stayed silent, holding my breath. My hands were slick with sweat, but I refused to let go. That book was more than paper, it was my grandmother's voice, my family's history, and now, proof of everything these monsters had done. Julian tried to block Eric's path, but the bigger man threw him aside like a rag doll. Julian hit the ground hard, groaning. Tessa smirked, stepping closer to me. "You really think you can outsmart us, little librarian?" she taunted. "You don't even belong in our world." Her words lit something inside me, something hot, fierce, and unshakable. I rose from behind the counter, my hands trembling but my voice steady. "You're right. I don't belong in your world. I belong in hers." I lifted the book slightly. "And she's watching me right now." Tessa's smirk faltered. "You're insane." "Maybe," I said. "But she's still going to win." Before she could react, I hurled the fire extinguisher at the floor. It exploded in another blinding cloud of white mist. She screamed, stumbling backward. I took the chance and ran for the door, the book pressed against my chest like a shield. "Callie!" Julian shouted from the floor. "Go!" I barely made it 2 steps before Eric's arm caught me from behind, yanking me back with brutal strength. The book slipped from my grip, tumbling to the floor. He pinned me against the wall, his breath hot and foul against my cheek. "You should have stayed out of this," he growled. A sudden crack split the air, a gunshot. My ears rang. Eric froze. His grip loosened, then dropped entirely. He stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers. I turned toward the doorway, heart pounding. 2 officers stood there, guns raised, shouting commands I couldn't process. Everything moved in flashes, Eric being dragged to the ground, Tessa screaming, Julian collapsing against the counter, police swarming the room. Someone gently took my arm, guiding me away from the chaos. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" I shook my head, though my whole body trembled uncontrollably. I couldn't take my eyes off Julian. He was slumped, blood staining his shirt, but he was alive. He met my gaze and gave a weak, almost peaceful smile. "It's over," I whispered. He nodded faintly. "Not yet." Hours later. The shop was a crime scene. Yellow tape crossed the doorway, police lights still flashing through the windows. I sat on the curb outside, wrapped in a blanket, giving my statement for what felt like the 100th time. Victor arrived just after dawn, his face pale with exhaustion. "Callie!" he breathed, crouching beside me. "Are you okay?" I nodded, though my voice barely came out. "They wanted the book, Victor. They would have killed for it." "I know," he said softly. "The police have it now. They'll keep it safe." My chest tightened. I didn't even get to say goodbye to it. He rested a Clowers, his hand on my shoulder. "You did what you had to do." I looked up at the faint glow of morning seeping through the clouds. The shop I'd loved my sanctuary was now littered with broken glass and shattered shelves. But I was still here. I'd kept my promise to my grandmother. I had fought for her. As the officers led Julian toward an ambulance, I stood and took a step toward him. "Julian," I called. He turned slowly, wincing from the pain. His eyes met mine, tired but clear. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" "For everything. For not stopping it sooner. For letting them use me. You deserve better." I swallowed hard. "Why did you do it? Why risk everything for a book?" He hesitated. "Because it wasn't just a book, it was the truth. And some truths are worth saving even if it costs everything." His words hit me like a physical blow. The officers guided him away, and I stood in the cold dawn light, watching him disappear into the flashing red and blue haze. The weight of it all pressed down on me, fear, anger, sadness, but underneath it was something else. Relief. The story wasn't over. But for the first time, I felt like I might survive it. As they took him away, he whispered something that chilled me. "It was never about money, Callie." His words haunted me long after the police lights faded. When the last officer left and the street finally fell silent, I sat alone in the wreckage of the paper lantern. The rising sun filtered through the broken windows, scattering fragments of light across the floor. Dust hung in the air like ghosts of every story that had once filled the shop. I was exhausted, my body ached, my heart heavier than I thought possible, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. This was my home, my grandmother's world. The book was gone now, taken into police custody as evidence. Part of me was relieved. Another part felt hollow, as if a piece of my soul had been boxed up with it. I ran my fingers along the counter where the book had once sat, tracing the empty space like a wound. Victor returned mid-morning, coffee in one hand, paperwork in the other. His face softened when he saw me sitting there among the ruins. "You should be at the hospital," he said gently. "I'm fine." I lied. "Julian?" He sighed. "Stable. They're keeping him under police watch. He'll probably face charges, but from what they gathered, he helped stop Tessa and Eric's operation. That'll count for something." I nodded slowly, the weight of last night pressing in again. He said it wasn't about money. Victor handed me a folded report. He told them the same thing, and now, "You need to see this." I opened the document. It was an official authentication summary from the forensic team. They'd analyzed the book, the ink, the binding, the handwriting in the margins. Everything was consistent with the early 1800s. The annotations were confirmed to be from Lady Adeline Whitmore herself. My heart pounded as I read further. The marginal notes weren't just poetic scribbles, they were confessions. Lady Adeline hadn't merely written a love story. She had disguised her own. The book contained hidden references to a secret affair with a member of the royal court, a man whose lineage still carried influence today. The notes revealed that their child had been quietly sent away and renamed. The revelation would rewrite a portion of literary and social history. The police had already passed the findings to the National Archive. I stared at the pages until my vision blurred. "My grandmother knew," I whispered. "She had to." Victor frowned. "You think she recognized the handwriting?" "She knew more than she ever said," I murmured. "She told me to keep it safe. She didn't say why. Maybe she was protecting more than just the book, maybe she was protecting me." Victor studied me carefully. "You think your family might be connected?" I didn't answer. But deep down, something told me yes. My grandmother had always been strangely protective of our lineage, refusing to talk about the generations before her. It was possible, no, it was likely that we were descended from the very secret the book had guarded for 2 centuries. The thought made me dizzy. Later that day, I went to the hospital to see Julian. The guard at the door gave me a wary look but let me in after a quick word with the detective in charge. Julian sat propped up against the pillows, pale and bruised. A faint smile tugging at his lips when he saw me. "You look better than the last time I saw you," he said weakly. "That's not saying much," I replied, managing a faint smile. Silence settled between us for a moment. Heavy but not uncomfortable. Finally, I asked, "Why did you come back for me? After everything?" He stared at the ceiling. "Because I couldn't let them destroy it. The book isn't just valuable, it's living proof of what truth costs people. Lady Adeline risked everything to tell her story. I didn't realize what that meant until I met you." I swallowed hard. "You could have just told me." "I was trying to," he said softly. "But by then, they already had their claws in me. I thought I could control it, turn the job into something less ugly. I was wrong. I wanted to stay angry, but his honesty stripped me of it. He wasn't blameless, but he wasn't heartless either. What will happen to you now?" He smiled faintly. "I'll testify. Help put them away. Maybe then I can start over." When I left the hospital, the air felt lighter. The cafe across the street from my shop had been shut down, its windows boarded, the sign torn down. The news had spread fast. Tessa and Eric were being charged with theft, fraud, and conspiracy. The town buzzed with the scandal, but I stayed quiet, rebuilding what I could. A few days later, the lead detective called me to the precinct. They were releasing the book to a secure archive, but before that, they wanted me to see it one last time. I held it in my hands carefully, feeling its weight, a weight of history, of truth, of blood and sacrifice. The leather felt warm under my palms. I flipped to the last annotated page and noticed something I hadn't seen before, a faint initial tucked into the corner, almost hidden by time. A. W. Adeline Whitmore. Below it, in tiny faded script, were 3 words. For her future. I pressed my hand to the page, a tear slipping down my cheek. I didn't know if Adeline had meant her child, her story, or someone like me, but it didn't matter. Her legacy had survived. And maybe that was the point all along. When I returned to the shop that evening, I found a single envelope slid under the door. No name, no address, just one line written across the front in looping script. For the keeper of stories. Inside was a note in Julian's handwriting. The book was never yours to own. It was yours to protect. Thank you for doing what I couldn't. And beneath the note, a small, pressed rose, faded, but still whole. I stared at it for a long time before slipping it between the pages of my grandmother's old ledger. The truth was finally out, but somehow, I felt closer to her than ever before, but I wasn't ready for the storm of fame that followed. Overnight, I went from that dusty book lady to the woman who found the lost literary treasure. It started with one article, then another. Within days, reporters from national outlets were calling, asking for interviews. My phone rang constantly, and strangers began showing up at the paper lantern, pressing their faces to the glass to catch a glimpse of me. I should have been thrilled. For years, people had mocked my little shop, dismissed it as a dying relic. Now it was the center of attention, but instead of excitement, all I felt was exhaustion. Fame wasn't flattering, it was suffocating. A week after the arrests, the New York Literary Review published a feature titled The Forgotten Rose, the woman who saved a lost voice of history. They painted me as some sort of hero, a guardian of art, a fierce protector of truth. They used words like resilient, visionary, unassuming genius. If they'd seen me sitting on the floor crying over broken shelves 2 nights earlier, they'd have written something very different. I didn't correct them, though. Maybe part of me liked that. For once, people were finally listening. The attention brought opportunity. Universities reached out, offering to host exhibitions about Lady Adeline's work. Collectors made offers, astronomical ones, for the authenticated manuscript. Some wanted to buy the rights to publish a special edition with her annotated notes. Others wanted me to sell the original outright. Every time I saw the numbers, my breath caught. I could rebuild the shop 10 times over, pay off my debts, and still live comfortably for life. But the idea of letting it go made my stomach twist. The book wasn't just mine, it was my grandmother's, and in a way, Lady Adeline's too. Selling it felt like betrayal. One morning, Victor came by with coffee and a folder full of contracts. "You can't ignore these forever," he said. "People aren't going to stop calling." "I don't want to be a celebrity," I muttered, flipping the literary review cover face down on the counter. "I just want my life back." He chuckled softly. "Too late for that, kid. You can either let this moment own you, or you can own it." His words stayed with me long after he left. Maybe he was right. Maybe I couldn't go back, but I could decide what came next. That night, I sat at my grandmother's old desk, staring at the ledger she'd once filled by hand. The pressed rose Julian had left was tucked safely inside it. I opened the first page and wrote, "A story is only forgotten when we stop telling it." Then, in the margins, I added, "Another note for her future." The next morning, I called Victor. "I'm going to auction it," I said. "But not for me." He didn't sound surprised. "What do you want to do with the proceeds?" "Half goes to literacy and preservation programs," I said. "For independent libraries, community reading centers, the places that keep stories alive. The rest will rebuild this shop properly." He smiled. "That sounds like something your grandmother would have done." The auction was held in New York 2 months later. The room was packed, journalists, historians, collectors from around the world. I wore a simple black dress and clutched a small pendant of my grandmother's as I stood backstage. The book rested under glass, its pages open to the first inscription, "To those who listen to silence." When the bidding started, I barely breathed. The numbers climbed faster than I could comprehend. 50,000, 100, then 200. By the time the gavel fell, the final number left the audience gasping. $780,000. Applause erupted, cameras flashed, but I barely heard it. All I could think about was my grandmother's voice in my head. Keep this one safe. I had. And now, I was letting it go, not to lose it, but to let it live on. The months that followed were a blur of interviews, letters from strangers, and thank you notes from people I'd never met. Donations poured into literacy programs across the country. Schools started calling the initiative the Paper Lantern Fund. I should have felt proud, and I did, but there was also a quiet sadness threaded through it all. The shop felt emptier without the book's quiet heartbeat on its shelf. Still, I rebuilt. With Victor's help, we restored the storefront, installed new lighting, and added a small exhibit corner, the legacy shelf. I called it. Inside a glass case sat a printed facsimile of Whispers of the Rose, open to the last page, with a plaque beneath it that read, "Discovered by Callie Morin, preserved for those who believe in stories." Locals who once sneered now smiled when they passed. Some even came in to apologize. One of the cafe's old customers told me she'd stopped by just to see the miracle book lady. I didn't correct her, it wasn't worth it. Let them believe what they wanted. The truth was simpler. I was just a woman who loved books. Late one evening, after closing, I sat alone in the quiet glow of the new lamps. The shelves gleamed with polished wood, the scent of paper and varnish mingling in the air. Everything looked new, but it still felt like home. I picked up my grandmother's ledger again, tracing the faded handwriting of her last entry. Next to it, I added a new one in my own hand. The story continues. I thought of Julian, then of his tired smile, his whispered apology. I hadn't heard from him since his sentencing, but sometimes I wondered if he knew what had become of the book, of me. Maybe that was why one afternoon I left an envelope with his name on it at the police station. Inside was a photo of the restored shop, a clipping of the auction headline, and a note that read, "It wasn't just a book, it was a beginning." For the first time in months, I felt peace settle deep in my bones. My grandmother's world was safe, her legacy alive. And my story, our story, finally had light again. But the peace didn't last long. A week later, while reorganizing some of the donated books, I found something strange. Hidden between two old poetry volumes was a slim leather notebook I'd never seen before. It wasn't mine. On the first page, in faded ink, were the words, "To Callie, the lantern still burns." Inside was a single folded note, handwritten in the same looping script as my grandmother's. My hands shook as I opened it. Because inside its back cover, I found one final note addressed to me. It was my grandmother's handwriting, faded, looping, unmistakable. A long moment, I just stared at the page, afraid to breathe. My eyes traced every curve of her familiar penmanship, every small hesitation in the ink where she must have paused mid-thought. I hadn't seen her handwriting since she passed away, and now here it was alive again, as if she had only just written it. My throat tightened as I began to read. My dearest Callie, if you're reading this, it means you've done what I never could. You've uncovered the story I promised to protect. The book chose you, just as it once chose me. There are things I couldn't tell you when you were younger, truths I feared would change how you saw the world, or how you saw me. My vision blurred with tears. I sank into the nearest chair, the note trembling in my hands. Lady Adeline's story didn't end in that book. It carried on through her child, the one history forgot. That child's descendants found new names, new homes, and eventually, this shop. You, my darling girl, are part of that legacy. The same blood that wrote those words runs in you. The room spun slowly. My grandmother had always spoken of our family with mystery, but I'd never imagined this. I pressed a shaking hand to my mouth, trying to process the impossible truth. I was the descendant of the very woman whose lost book had changed everything. The hidden author who'd risked everything for truth and love had been my ancestor. I read on. When I first found the book, I knew what it meant. I promised to keep it safe until someone worthy of it came along. Someone who understood stories not as possessions, but as living things. I always knew that someone would be you. A tear splashed onto the page. Do not let the world take your light, Callie. There will always be those who sneer at what they don't understand, dusty books, forgotten stories, quiet souls. But you and I, we were never meant to chase the noise. We are the keepers of silence, the guardians of what others overlook. I could almost hear her voice as I read, soft, warm, patient. I smiled through the tears. The paper lantern isn't just a shop, it's a promise. Every person who walks through that door carries a story, even if they don't know it yet. Help them find it. That's what this place was always meant to do. At the bottom, her signature trailed off delicately. With all my love, Grandma Yvette. I folded the letter carefully, my chest aching with a strange, beautiful heaviness. The shop around me felt different now, not just mine but hers, and Adeline's, and every woman who had come before us. The air shimmered with their presence, their courage, their inked whispers across time. I placed the letter inside the notebook and set it on the counter beside my grandmother's ledger. Then, without thinking, I reached for the shop lights and turned them up. The room filled with golden glow, illuminating the rows of spines that had witnessed my entire journey. Outside, the evening had fallen a soft, dusky blue brushing against the windows. The sign above the door flickered gently in the wind. The paper lantern. I moved through the aisles slowly, running my fingers along the shelves. Every book here had survived something: fire, neglect, indifference. They weren't just objects, they were survivors, like me. Like her. The bell above the door jingled, breaking the stillness. I turned to see a young woman standing hesitantly at the entrance. She couldn't have been older than 20. Her clothes were simple, her expression curious. "Hi," she said softly. "I saw your shop online. You're the lady who found the lost book, right?" I smiled. "I am. But I'm just Callie, really." She stepped closer, eyes wide as she looked around. "It's beautiful in here. It smells like old stories." "That's the best compliment you could give me," I said, laughing lightly. "Are you looking for anything in particular?" "Not really," she said. "Just something that feels right. Something with history." I nodded and led her toward a small corner shelf near the back, the same one where my grandmother's book had once rested. My hand brushed the wood, polished smooth from years of touch. I pulled out a worn volume of poetry and handed it to her. "This one has waited a long time for the right reader," I said. She smiled shyly, flipping through the pages. "How do you know?" "Because it just told me," I replied. Her laughter filled the quiet shop. Light and genuine. She carried the book to the counter, and as I wrapped it, I caught sight of the rose pendant around her neck, small, silver, gleaming faintly under the light. I smiled. Perhaps nothing in life was coincidence. After she left, the bell chimed again, fading into silence. I stood behind the counter for a long time, staring at the empty doorway. The warmth of the lamps, the faint scent of paper and tea, the whisper of wind through the cracked window pane, it all wrapped around me like a familiar story finally finding its ending. I glanced down at my grandmother's letter one last time. Her words echoed softly in my mind. "We are the keepers of silence." I closed my eyes and whispered, "I'll keep it safe, Grandma. Always." Then I walked to the front window and flipped the sign from closed to open. The evening air drifted in, cool and sweet. I took a deep breath, the kind that fills you with peace instead of fear. Outside, people passed by, their lives moving like pages in a book I'd never read but loved anyway. Inside, the lantern light glowed softly, steady and warm. And as I turned to face the shelves, each spine a heartbeat, each title a memory, I felt a quiet smile rise to my lips. The world could keep its noise, its judgment, its sneers. I knew something they didn't. That magic doesn't always come from power or fame. Sometimes, it's found in the dust, in the forgotten corners, in the people who refuse to stop believing in stories. And now, when they sneer at my dusty books, I just smile because I know every story hides a secret.